Hello, we are here at the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative in the Holler Studio. We want to welcome you today. I'm Johnny Belcher, work with as lead in the Future Ready Assessment Initiative. Here with me today is Katrina Sloan, who works with many initiatives within the KVEC region, within the area of science. But we've invited today for a conversation about our Science Through Course task. Teresa Emmerich to my left and Chris Bentley also to my left, who are science instructional specialists with Kentucky Department of Education and who have been traveling extensive miles going across the state working with TCTs as well as the science assessment system as a whole. So we want to begin a conversation to help with kind of filling in the lines with the information that's been put out so far with the Kentucky Science Assessment System. And I believe we'll begin with Katrina as a first question.
Yeah, so we've been hearing a lot about Kentucky's new science assessment system. Can you talk a little bit about the components of the system?
Kentucky's assessment system was developed in response to our new standards. Kentucky academic standards are three-dimensional standards. It's the first look that we've had with true three-dimensional standards. And when I say three-dimensional, I'm talking about the cross-cutting concepts or the way scientists think and reason, and the science and engineering practices or what scientists do, along with the content or DCI. So you guys have seen these boxes, the orange and the blue and the green boxes that make up our standards. Our standards are truly three-dimensional. And to get information around the three-dimensional nature of the standards, we really needed a new approach to assessment. So we have components, which is the typical summative assessment or the high-stakes assessment that will be field tested this year for the first time. It was piloted last year. But we also have devised a classroom-embedded assessment piece and a through-course task assessment piece. Now, the nature of these two assessment pieces are formative in nature. Classroom embedded is your minute-by-minute instruction in your classroom. It's the information you're gleaning for the tasks going on daily in your classrooms to make instructional decisions around three-dimensional teaching and learning. To meet the needs of the summative assessment system at the end, there's really going to be a need to focus on three-dimensional teaching and learning. And for teachers to understand what that looks like, we've engaged in through-course tasks to help those teachers calibrate collectively or collaboratively with other professionals to really kind of bridge the gap between what's going on in their classrooms daily that would allow students to meet the needs of that instruction to show mastery on our new standards at the end.
So Chris, if I'm hearing you correctly, then there's actually three components to this overall Kentucky Science Assessment System. And so if I understand correctly, classroom embedded is one component, through course task, and then finally a summative component, which is what we're used to seeing. Classroom embedded, more like what teachers are doing every day?
Sure, yeah. Kentucky Department of Education is not going to create classroom embedded assessments for teachers. These are the things that teachers need to be doing to three-dimensionally or phenomenon-based instruction in the classroom that teachers should be doing that would enable their students to meet the needs of meet these new standards proficiently. The problem is that we've had a lot of instruction historically that's content-based. So science teachers are really good at content. They feel really strong at content, but they really haven't discovered yet overall. I mean, there's really, really good teachers doing this out there, but to calibrate what good instruction would look like around the practices and cross-cutting concepts, we're hoping the through-course task piece, the central piece of that, this mid-cycle formative, will allow students and teachers to understand what three-dimensional learning would be needed to meet the needs of the summative assessment at the end.
So something we hear around the state a lot is this difference between assessment and accountability. And it seems like assessment is kind of a formal word we've used that was typically always associated with an accountability system. But when we say classroom embedded assessments, that can be as simple as tests and quizzes and the things that teachers are doing formatively within their classroom. Is that correct?
Yeah. And many of our districts and teachers have been really focusing on assessment literacy, so these formative assessment pieces that are happening when they're questioning their students. So That's nothing new. It's just how do we focus on all three dimensions as we're questioning and collecting evidence about where our students are, maybe with exit slips or, and it may not be a thing. It may just be part of that teacher's practice that they're, collecting that evidence about where their students are in
So
their
making sure
understanding.
that we're collecting evidence about the practices and the cross-cutting concepts as well as the content.
Yes.
And not just
Every
to
day.
collect it, but actually to do something with it. So to make this truly formative in nature, it's not just about doing the thing or the item, it's about responding with changes in instruction that would move students forward, meeting them where they are, moving them toward proficiency.
So, of those three components, the piece that seems to be getting the most buzz right now is the through course task. Can you tell us a little bit more about through course tasks?
Yeah, well, that's what I was saying about the through course task being this calibration piece. What we want to get out of this are teachers and students both understanding what true three-dimensional tasks look like, feel like, to engage with those within the concept of the cross-cutting concepts as the sense-making lens. So if you think of cross-cutting concepts or how scientists think or reason, and science and engineering practices, or the blue box, there's eight practices that students need to be engaging with daily in instruction. What good instruction is what are those students doing daily? And that could be analyzing data, using mathematical reasoning, asking good questions. The cross-cutting concepts are 7 of those, and they shift from patterns thinking all the way through systems and system interactions. So the through course task will be designed to allow teachers and students both to understand what good is in instruction and learning around the practices and cross-cutting concepts. The content is there, but it's phenomenon based, as all of our assessment pieces should be. Phenomenon is where the DCI live. It's where the content lives. They may or may not be grade band connected pieces of content, but the content is in there. But the focus will be around what the practices are, how do they look from students in your classroom, and what the cross-cutting concept is for the sense-making lens. That's going to be the focus of this assessment, because that's where the shift needs to happen in instruction. Again, teachers feel pretty comfortable with the content, but those shifts in instruction are going to happen in what they're doing and how they're thinking. We're trying to shift the idea from hands-on to minds-on. So the shifts in instruction really need to happen when you really are engaging students in thinking skills.
So the new science standards, if I was thinking about summary, the new science standards are more than just standards in that what we call disciplinary core ideas are just kind of content type things.
Typically.
It's this science and engineering practices as well as cross-cutting concepts. It's kind of new for us in Kentucky and across the nation that we're thinking about application-based, and students, like you say, is minds-on with that. So the TCT's purpose then is to help bring in those 2 other pieces, is what you're saying.
It is. It's a tool. It's a good tool for teachers to really gauge what their instruction is, or what it looks like in their classroom, what kind of tasks that they should be engaging in, and what their students are doing with those tasks, what that evidence needs to look like around those practices and cross-cutting concepts. The summative assessment that was developed, that we worked on this summer with the teachers in the state, it was a really difficult process to write items that really sampled the practices and cross-cutting concepts. So the nature of those items are a little different. So when teachers participate in the field test this year, the students are going to get the first really overall look at what those questions really ask of them. And so the obvious question would be, well, how do I prepare them for that? And so we're hoping then that they can see these through course tasks as a means to develop these skills and reasoning capabilities in their students. You have to be able to calibrate this across the state in order to have this success. Everybody has to have the same understanding of what good is.
So my teachers are ready to get started with this, and they've been to the SharePoint site and the tasks are there. So is that pretty much all they need to do, is go there, get the task off the SharePoint site, and give it to their students?
Well, it's a little bit more than that. I've heard a lot of teachers say, I'm ready to do my TCT tomorrow. And so my first question is, well, have you went through the TCT process? Because if we're truly going to calibrate and really understand that 3-dimensional assessment instruction, then they need to collaborate with their colleagues. So the process is 3 steps: planning, facilitating, and then the post-task analysis. And really, that's the key to this whole thing, having those conversations with other people to truly understand what that standard's asking, and to put it in perspective for yourself. Am I doing what's best for my kids?
So this process, it's prescriptive in nature. We're offering these 3 things, but basically what it is, it's just good teaching. It's the prescription for good teaching and learning in the classroom. It's not another thing we're dropping on you. We should be doing this as teachers anyway to prepare ourselves to facilitate learning in the classroom. It's just the way that we're asking teachers to do this. Perhaps may be different, but some teachers and districts are doing this anyway. We're just going to try to scale this good practice out statewide.
Okay, so a little bit more than just simply going and giving the task.
That's
is
right.
what you're saying. And so now the next phase for teachers and districts, what's expected of us right now? What is it that we should be doing right now?
Well, I would imagine that there's probably 5 things, if I'm a teacher in a classroom right now, that I would be thinking to try to get through by March. Of course, we've said that this needs to happen by March. I wrote down 5 things to do. So if I'm a teacher and I get this information from my districts or whomever, and I say, I need to get started, the first thing you probably need to do is get with some professional in a professional learning community, meet with other professionals to determine what task that you're going to select. We have to engage in a similar task to be able to calibrate.
So you're talking about like a grade level team?
A grade level team, a school level team, depending on the size of the district or the size of the school in mind. So you would want to sit down and you would want to come to an agreement. Hey, we're going to be working on this particular task. And when I say that, you can go to SharePoint. And within SharePoint, the tasks are all listed by grade level. So obviously, if you're a 4th grade teacher or a 7th grade teacher, you would go to those particular grades. You would spend some time into the resources with those tasks and make a determination. Okay, as a group, what task is it that we want to calibrate with? Okay, so that'd be the first step, to select that task from SharePoint that you want to engage with. Look at the annotations, look at the resources associated with it to truly understand that. And then individually, we're hoping that teachers will sit down. It was prescribed that they do this within the facilitation guide. They sit down with that task and struggle with it themselves. Go over it, read all the annotation, read the intent, look at the success criteria, maybe look at student work after you've engaged with it.
To actually take the task yourself.
By yourself individually. So before you come back to a PLC meeting, you really want to have some experience in what this task looks like, feels like, and what's the requirements for your students. Okay? So again, now you're back at your PLC meeting having had experience with this task. So you can sit down with other professionals and say, this is how I felt when I took it. These are the demands of my students. These are the sticky points. These are some things, anticipate some things that you've experienced during the task that you want to prepare your students for. And at this point, during planning, we have prescribed in the document planning for facilitation, those outcomes and those steps that teachers need to be aware of as they go through this planning process. Maybe perhaps create a facilitation check sheet. So step 1, meet, come to some agreement of the same task. Step 2, individually take the task, get it familiar with it. Step 3, meet back in a PLC, go over this task with them, come to some agreement about what facilitation needs to look like in your classroom. Step 4 is pretty simple. It's just following the plan that you created during the PLC. So this is how I plan to facilitate this task, to make sure that every student in my classroom has an equal opportunity to engage in the task and leave evidence behind of the practices and cross-cutting concepts. Because remember, that's the focus. We're looking for what students do with the practices, what they do with the cross-cutting concepts. So when we prepare for them to do this, we're enabling them to show us what they can do. Remember, it's a snapshot, this mid-cycle formative piece that we really want to get information about. And then, obviously, after facilitation, you're going to come back together and do student work. But you don't have to do that before March. What you want to do before March is select one piece of work per your class that is representative of the overall success of the students in that class. That's representative of what student work was done in that class. hold on to that piece of work, and KDE is going to, in the next few weeks, decide on how we're going to select those from each district. But just hold on to those pieces of student work for right now.
That's a point that's been brought up, and we've heard that by teachers. Is what do I pick as an example or a sample of student work, and it's a good advice in the sense that we're looking at what's representative of the whole class or all my classes, and I don't have to think about this low, medium, high, top thing. I can think about what's representative of the whole. Is that correct?
It is. It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
If a teacher wanted to keep low, medium, and high, that'd be fine. There's other uses for student work, and there's some great uses for student work. What about blacking out the names and using it in subsequent years? Modeling, annotating why it's low, why low is low, why medium is medium, why high is high. It's a great learning opportunity for students to really be able to point that out with other students' work, anonymously.
Gotcha. And is it of any benefit for teachers to pick a low performing piece in the notion of stacking the deck for future use? We always have that question, don't we, with accountability?
We're hoping to move away from that playing the game kind of thing with this new science assessment system, our new accountability system. The whole purpose of this through course task is mainly for the teachers to see where their students are and for you to reflect about your own practice. So we aren't going to judge you or evaluate you by the type of student work that you send in. One of the reasons that we're asking for that is to help us see, is this a good task? Does it need to be tweaked a little bit? If everybody sends in samples of student work where kids are getting hung up on the same thing, then we know, hey, this has got to be worked on a little bit. It also helps us if we can start building a bank of representative samples, then we can show teachers what students are doing on this. So, give them
almost like benchmarks.
So that teachers have that opportunity. It's not a gotcha or anything like that. It's mainly for the teacher's benefit. That's one thing that I hope from this video that they understand, that this shouldn't be something that stresses you out, the TCT process. This is something that's supposed to help you. You may have heard some things that make it sound scary, but it's really not. It's about teachers working together.
It is.
Well, in some districts, the administration says, okay, we're going to go ahead and collect all of your student samples, or we want a high, medium, and low from each class. Is that okay to do?
Well, obviously, we can't control what districts do, and that's fine. I mean, KDE is going to collect one sample of student work per grade level from these districts, and that's all that we're asking teachers.
And we're not going to ask a district for all grades, so it'll be random. So, this district based in a first grade, a fifth grade, and a high school sample. So that collection process is really not, it's not something I can speak to know exactly how and when and who's going to be selected for what. But it's just that what we're telling teachers is to keep a sample of student work that is representative of the work that was done in that classroom.
So the collection process, that's probably something that's going to go out to district assessment coordinators. Is that correct?
I would imagine OAA will take care of that.
So there could be a little variation in how that request comes out, but as long as teachers are saving their student samples,
they're fine.
They're going to be good on
that. The most important thing is what we're asking teachers to do is to engage in this tool. And become familiar with it, and really to dispel some of these myths that's out there about it being something piled on them. We're hoping that this is a tool that teachers will want to use going forward to calibrate. It's an interesting opportunity. The teachers that I've talked to have really enjoyed engaging in some of these tasks and looking at the student work that's on SharePoint to know where their students stack up and what they're doing instructionally. Am I as good as what I'm seeing out there as far as these other students?
It's really been like across the state. I don't know. We've had a lot of teachers that are actually relieved when they understand, oh, this is all we have to do, because it's already a normal part of their work at times, collaborating with others. And
so speaking to that the process that you just outlined and things, and that idea of it being a part of instruction, so what is some advice that you would give to teachers as far as which task to pick or how to pick a task?
There's not really an advantage to picking one or the other, I would advise teachers there's an annotation guide with each task
In the SharePoint.
in the SharePoint. And when they go there, there's going to be success criteria in a table on each one. And that success criteria comes from the appendices, Appendix F and G.
Yes, the practice.
Of the
G and the
standards.
next generation science
Yes,
standards.
appendices F and G details by grade band what those practices look like and cross-cutting concepts. And remember, that's the focus here. So when they go there, those bullets within those appendices will really detail what those practices that the task is focusing on looks like. And so a teacher, like Teresa was saying, a teacher would look at those and say, I've really been working a whole lot. My growth goal this year was on data analysis. So perhaps maybe I want to engage in a task around it to see how my students are doing, get this snapshot of how they're performing in data analysis.
So success criteria, I heard you mention that. Is that a little bit like a rubric, a little bit like that, or not?
Well, we don't really want to say rubric here because that would imply that we would be scoring or judging these tasks or the student work, and we're not doing that at all. We know going into these that these skills are developing by students, so we really don't want teachers to score these things. Providing feedback on it's a different story. So we want those teachers to provide the feedback that would meet those learners and move them toward proficiency, but not with a grade. We don't want a 20 out of 20 on this, okay? Or
This
a
is
10
formative
out of-
assessment.
Sure, and we want to make those instructional adjustments more so than we do actually want to score these. But the success criteria Johnny was talking about, what Teresa was speaking of, was really digging into what the appendices are pretty explicit in what they say about the practices. Students will be able to do this, and this, along with the practices of cross-cutting. So it's pretty much spelled out for the teachers who developed these tasks wrote success criteria, and they anticipated what student work might look like or might include, and their samples of student work on there. So teachers, as they dig into these resources, will really get a good understanding of what to expect from their students. And moving forward, we should be able to calibrate what that looks like. And I've heard Dr. Pruitt speak of this sliding scale of good. So this year, we're going to have various stages of good, and next year we hope this has an exponential curve. It's going to improve over time as students become more familiar with the practices and cross-cutting.
So teachers that open up a TCT for the first time and they have a criticism of a particular thing, or maybe there's something about it that they don't like, is this a process for all of us?
Yes. So we don't want anybody thinking that all of these are exemplars, because these were created by Kentucky teachers. They really took a big step into creating these, because they were it was a scary process, because we don't know what this looks like yet, and so as the years go through, we'll get better and better at creating these. Now, teachers are not going to have to create these in their classroom. These are always going to be shared on SharePoint. So but they are not exemplars, so they may not see something in there that they think is perfect. That's okay. As they can scaffold this, they can do some things with it, as long as it doesn't interfere with the intent of the evidence they're supposed to collect from the success criteria.
So I don't want to over scaffold it and
Right.
teach the whole thing. I want to give opportunities for the students to show me what it is that they know.
Exactly. To
So-
grapple with that cross-cutting concept, that sense making, so that they that you can get an idea of where they are in their learning. So one thing that I think that teachers could use the success criteria is for developing some feedback questions, so that you could, if you anticipate misconceptions, you could use that success criteria to develop some feedback questions, and then keep track of that maybe during the facilitation process to say, okay, these 4 students, I had to ask this question. Where are they? And maybe do some interventions later on, or to, when I get ready to plan instruction the next time, I have that information in front of me.
So being a district assessment coordinator, we've always been taught we can only say do your best. So this is completely something different.
Completely
This
different.
isn't an assessment that is with all of those rules. This
No.
is about instruction. It's formative. and all the things that happen with good instruction are okay to happen in the classroom.
But
Just as
again,
long as I can use it for assessment and use it to get information about what my students are
so
doing.
the key here is for those teachers who are engaging in these tasks to really understand what the intent of the task is. If it is to develop reasoned questions, that's fine, okay? So we want our students to develop reasoned questions, but they may also be a part in the student task where they have to analyze data to do that. So I think Teresa was talking about scaffolding. The intent of the task was those questions. So if they really need to dig in some way, and if you know your students better than KDE does, and you're going to say, hey, I'm going to have to make some adjustments to how these certain students would interpret this data. You're not interfering with the intent of the task, which was the questions that they're going to be leaving on the paper. So perhaps you might want to scaffold some work around the student's ability to interpret data. All these tasks have two practices in them for the most part. And so that second task in a lot of cases is the one that they're leaving evidence on the papers of the students. So don't interfere with that student's ability to construct those reasoned questions. But it's okay to scaffold part of the understanding of the data that they're looking at and to evaluate that data.
Gotcha. Well, with the SharePoint side, is there anything there that we should highlight before we kind of wrap things up, just as a quick overview today?
Let me walk teachers through that are watching today. I know when we started this process, I had never been on SharePoint that much. I find it's very easy to use. You can go through this through webmail, which I guess is Office 365. And when you pull that up, there'll be some apps listed there, and SharePoint is one of those. And when you click on that, you would have to find the through course task. I think it's over on the left-hand side. But if you use the link, it takes you straight to this home page. It says, welcome to the through course task resource bank. So there's some information there about through course task. And if you scroll down, you'll see that there's some documents there. There's an acronym sheet, which we found out as soon as we started this professional learning series. There are lots of acronyms within the assessment system for science. And so I think that Sean Elkins has named this the AS acronym sheet. So there's also the task template structure that we used. I think that would be helpful for teachers as they begin to think about, can I create a classroom embedded baby task that that incorporates the practices and cross-cutting concepts around a phenomenon. And then there's a facilitation guidance, which is some frequently asked questions. So make sure that you're in classic view on this so that you get the correct view. If you go over to the left, you're on home right now, but if you click on through course tasks, it will take you to the list of tasks. The title is there on the left, but then if you look, the grades, whichever grade it's appropriate for is listed to the right of that. And if you scroll over to the right, you're going to start finding the documents. So it talks about the phenomenon within the task first, the science and engineering practice that it intends to collect, that you need to collect evidence for, and then the cross-cutting concept. As you scroll over, you'll find the task, and then the annotation guide and any resources that teacher felt that were appropriate to include. So there's some samples of student work usually with that. One thing you might notice is that the student work doesn't always match the task perfectly. And this is because after they got student work back, they realized there were some issues and needed to work on that a little bit. So it may look a little different. But the annotation guide that includes the success criteria, I think, is vital when you're getting ready to implement this. So you definitely need to have that in your hand to discuss during the planning phase.
Got you. That's a big help. Well, the purpose of today was to give us an overview, get our foot in the door, and start to try to get some information out there that might be helpful as teachers begin this process. Does anyone have any questions that they still would like to ask, or anything that you would like to add?
I don't think so.
Well, in summary, I just want teachers to understand this is not another thing. It's not some big monster that's going to be dropped in there on them. It's going to be made by teachers for teachers as a tool to use. We hope that teachers will find this useful enough that we're going to mandate this to be done one time this year. But calibration is very important in building that understanding of what good is. So going forward, as more and more of these tasks are coming online, I mean, this is just the first round of these. Teachers will be able to engage with these tasks many different times during the year. However, as a teacher, however many times that you would need to calibrate to understand what good really looks like with these practices and cross-cutting concepts. So it's something that we want teachers to utilize going forward, not to look at like it's this hairy monster out there. We're going to drop on their desk to say, "Gotcha."
I've even had teachers say, "I know I only have to do one, but since they're there, can I do all the ones for my grade band?" Because they see it as a resource to help them gather some evidence. Because that's not something that we've typically done in the past. Is thought about where kids were in relation to practices around science concepts and the cross-cutting concepts, those minds-on kinds of things.
Well, is that all that I need to do then? If I just do all the TCTs for my, say, second grade classroom, is that pretty much all I need to do to teach science?
Well, absolutely not. If you think about the standards, the performance expectations per grade band that CAS, Kentucky Academic Standards, has required of teachers, these tasks are snapshots of student learning. They are not curriculum. The phenomenon within these tasks are not something everybody has to go teach the rainbow unit or whatever these phenomenon is. It's not that at all. The standards are still the standards that you must meet. The content of the standards is still the content that you need to make sure your students have the understanding of. But remember, in order to get those standards out there, you need to be engaging in all 8 practices and all 7 cross-cutting concepts as frequently and as often as you can to surround this content with. To really get deep into the content, students are going to need all kinds of supports and all kinds of experiences with those practices and cross-cutting concepts, not the specific 3 dimensions that are in these individual tasks, nor not the specific 3 dimensions that are in our standards. Standards are written 3-dimensionally. They have a practice, a cross-cutting concept, and a piece of content. But to teach that standard, for students to meet that standard, you will need all kinds of experiences, not maybe just that specific practice and cross-cutting concept.
I think you need to remember as well that we're not really collecting evidence of the content through that phenomenon in that TCT. So you can't solely rely on the TCTs to teach all of your content.
Well, you can collect evidence of it, but that's not the focus of the test.
Well, yeah. But you're not going to get all the content of
the
your
DCI,
grade level.
Right,
yeah. If all you do is the TCTs.
So a snapshot truly in terms of content and more so focused on student experiencing a task that will help us to understand how science engineering practices and cross-cutting concepts come together.
That's right. That is the focus of it, John.
Okay, fantastic. Well, a lot of information today. This is a deep process because we're all learning. It's a process that will continue throughout this year and in the near future also. And as always trying to learn to do the best for our students. But as an addition to this video, we'll follow up with a frequently asked questions portion. And we'll have that in addition to this, but this is the first part of what we hope to be a series related to this TCT process that will have some things upcoming to where we can delve deeper into the individual process, like you mentioned, of planning, facilitating, and post-task analysis. We just can't thank you enough for being here, Katrina, here with me, and you guys coming in with a very busy schedule to help us understand this better.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks. Our pleasure.